Greetings and welcome. I hope this finds you in reasonably good spirits and that you feel healthy and resilient physically and psychologically. I'm Daniel Lazar, and I am proud to be the faculty advisor to the Kennedy School chapter of the National Honor Society. As you know, our NHS induction ceremony was unceremoniously disrupted by the COVID crisis. I was so looking forward to welcoming the class of 2021 and bidding a fond farewell to the class of 2020. I desperately wish I could be with you to celebrate your accomplishments, to share ideas, to look forward to a new chapter. Just to be together. Because I respect what this organization stands for. And much more, I respect what the Kennedy School chapter of the National Honor Society strives for. And I'm grateful, truly grateful for the opportunity to be able to support young scholars in their pursuits of service and leadership. I've supported NHS chapters in 3 countries over 2 decades. And I fondly recall reestablishing the National Honor Society at the Kennedy School in 2010. The 10 members of the NHS class of 2011 laid a really strong foundation for NHS at our school. The NHS classes since then have built on that foundation. And every NHS chapter, every one, has been exemplary in its own way. And every NHS chapter has been an experiment, and on some level, a struggle. The NHS class of 2021 will build on the foundation that's been laid for them. Your task is ambitious. You too will experiment, and you too will struggle. Indeed, it is ambition and struggle on which I seek to meditate here. If you don't know of John Lewis, let me start here. He's the greatest living American. Born a sharecropper in Jim Crow, Alabama, by the time he was your age, he was fully engaged in the struggle for civil rights. In 1960, at the tender age of 20, he was so committed to the fight for racial integration that he became one of the first 13 Freedom Riders. In 1963, having been repeatedly beaten by the police and arrested 24 times in the struggle for equality and just basic human dignity, he became the chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. That same year, he was one of the 6 leaders who organized the March on Washington, at which Dr. King gave his perfect "I Have a Dream" speech. The next summer, he organized students your age to register Black voters in the South during the Mississippi Freedom Summer. And the spring after that, he led the march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. When the marchers crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge, they stopped to pray for light and guidance, for which the Alabama police gassed and beat them, fracturing John Lewis's skull. And thus began the ambitious struggle of young John Lewis. Against all odds, he went on to have an illustrious career as the distinguished congressman from Georgia. In his 30-plus years on Capitol Hill, he fought not just for civil rights, but for human rights, earning him the nickname, the conscience of the Congress. As you might know, the conscience of the Congress, now age 80, was recently diagnosed with late-stage pancreatic cancer. Having spent his life fighting for the most vulnerable among us, he's now fighting for his life. And to celebrate and to honor him, I decided at long last to read his memoir, from which I want to share a passage with you. I want you to listen closely I invite you to close your eyes. It's okay. Just listen. He begins his book with a little story. It has nothing to do, he says, with the national stage or historic figures or monumental events. It's a simple story, a true story, about a group of young children, a wood frame house, and a windstorm. The children were my cousins, Roy Lee and Ginny Boy, Naomi and Leslie and Willie Muriel, about a dozen of them all told, along with my older sister Ora and my brothers Edward and Adolph and me, John Robert. I was 4 years old at the time, too young to understand there was a war going on over in Europe and out in the Pacific as well. The grown-ups called it a world war, but I had no idea what they meant. The only world I knew was the one I stepped out into each morning, a place of thick pine forests and white cotton fields and red clay roads winding around my family's house in our little corner of Pike County, Alabama. We had just moved that spring onto some land my father had bought, the first land anyone in his family had ever owned, 110 acres of cotton and corn and peanut fields, along with an old but sturdy 3-bedroom house, a large house for that part of the county, the biggest place for miles around. It had a well in the front yard and pecan trees out back and muscadine grapevines growing wild in the woods all around us. Our woods. My father bought the property from a local white businessman who lived in the nearby town of Troy. The total payment, $300, cash. That was every penny my father had to his name. Money he had earned the way almost everyone we knew made what money they could in those days, by tenant farming. My father was a sharecropper, planting, raising, and picking the same crops that had grown in that soil for hundreds of years by tribes like the Choctaws and the Chickasaws and the Creeks, Native Americans who were working this land long before the place was called Alabama, long before black or white men were anywhere to be seen in those parts. Almost every neighbor we had in those woods was a sharecropper, and most of them were our relatives. Nearly every adult I knew was an aunt or an uncle, every child my first or second cousin. That included my Uncle Rabbit and Aunt Seneva and their children, who lived about a half mile or so up the road from us. On this particular afternoon, it was a Saturday, I'm almost certain, about 15 of us children were outside my Aunt Seneva's house, playing in her dirt yard. The sky began clouding over. The wind started picking up. Lightning flashed far off in the distance. And suddenly I wasn't thinking about playing anymore. I was terrified. I had already seen what lightning could do. I'd seen fields catch on fire after a hit to a haystack. I'd watched trees actually explode when a bolt of lightning struck them, the sap inside rising to an instant boil, the trunk swelling until it burst its bark. The sight of those strips of pine bark snaking through the air like ribbons was both fascinating and horrifying. Lightning terrified me, so did thunder. My mother used to gather us around her whenever we heard thunder, and she'd tell us to hush. Be still now, because God was doing his work. That's what thunder was, my mother said, the sound of God doing his work. But my mother wasn't with us on this particular afternoon. Aunt Seneva was the only adult around, and as the sky blackened and the wind grew stronger, she herded us all inside. Her house was not the biggest place around, and it seemed even smaller with so many children squeezed inside. Small and surprisingly quiet. All of the shouting and laughter that had been going on earlier outside had stopped. The wind was howling now, and the house was starting to shake. We were scared. Even Aunt Seneva was scared. And then it got worse. Now the house was beginning to sway. The wood plank flooring beneath us began to bend, and then a corner of the room started lifting up. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. None of us could. The storm was actually pulling the house toward the sky, with us inside it. That's when Aunt Geneva told us to clasp hands. Line up and hold hands, she said, and we did as we were told. Then she had us walk up as a group towards the corner of the room that was rising. From the kitchen to the front of the house, we walked, the wind screaming outside, sheets of rain beating on the tin roof. Then we walked back to the other direction as another end of the house began to lift. And so it went, back and forth, 15 children, walking with the wind, holding that trembling house down with the weight of our small bodies. More than half a century has passed since that day, and it has struck me more than once over those many years that our society is not unlike the children in that house, rocked again and again by the winds of one storm or another, the walls around us seeming at times as if they might fly apart. It seemed that way in the 1960s, at the height of the civil rights movement, when America itself felt as if it might burst at the seams. So much tension, so many storms. But the people of conscience never left the house. They never ran away. They stayed, they came together, and they did the best they could, clasping hands and moving toward the corner of the house that was the weakest. And then another corner would lift, and we would go there. And eventually, inevitably, the storm would settle, and the house would still stand. But we knew another storm would come, and we'd have to do it all over again. And we did. And we still do. All of us, you and I, children holding hands, walking with the wind. And so I invite you, NHS class of 2021, in our stormy times, to hold hands and walk with the wind. May NHS inspire you to contribute to what John Lewis calls our beloved community. A community committed to engage in the timeless, honorable, some would say sacred endeavor to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I hope this offer appeals to you. And I hope you cherish your experiences with the National Honor Society. Now, before I wrap this little video up, I want to address the NHS class of 2020. First, I gotta tell y'all that I miss you like a dog misses his bone. I wish we could be together. That said, I'm afraid by the time March rolled around, NHS probably became just like another commitment to many, if not most, NHS members. Another set of responsibilities to drive over on the path upwards and onwards. But I would like to propose to the graduating seniors that maybe, just maybe, in 5 or 10 or 20 years, as the mystic chords of memory weave their magic, that your reflections on your NHS experiences might just change. NHS might become something else, something different in your minds. And I hope that the graduating seniors, be it now or later, find fondness in your commitment to the National Honor Society. I guess this is just another way of me saying that I hope that you have learned or will soon learn valuable lessons in coming together with like-minded, talented people to hold hands and to walk with the wind. It's been a real pleasure, a bona fide honor to work with you And for you, you have every right and every reason to be proud of what you've done. I respect you all, and I'm really thankful to have had the chance to work with you. And last but not least, I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to our NHS presidents in the class of 2020, Jania Ware and Daniel Aaron Delphs. It's been my pleasure to work with them as they've tinkered with this little NHS experiment. They're both so brilliant and motivated and intense. I really admire them, both of them, on so many levels. They managed our project with such independence. I've literally never done so little as an NHS advisor because I trust them both so much. And I adore them and I enjoy them. And I can only hope that they found some joy in managing NHS. Thank you both from the bottom of my heart. To the NHS class of 2021, I hope you find passion and meaning in your NHS pursuits. Obviously, this chapter is going to be a little bit different. Let's try to find a way to clasp hands and to move towards the corner of the house that's the weakest. I look forward to working with you. Bye.